This is Dougsember. YouTube advertising rates tend to be higher at the end of the year, especially in December, because it's such a gift-giving time, gift buying due to the holidays. And so a lot of YouTube content creators, myself included, try to put up some of their best content this month to take advantage of those higher ad rates. So yesterday I reviewed a Koenigsegg, and today I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I cut out of my Koenigsegg review. First, a little word about Dougsember. So far, you have seen reviews of the Jaguar I-Pace, the new controversial electric SUV from Jaguar, the Porsche 959, an all-time classic, the E60 BMW M5, which is a great car, aside from its issues. I've been getting a lot of requests to do the E60 M5, but those were just the appetizers for Dougsember, because yesterday I reviewed the Koenigsegg, which obviously did incredibly well, over 1 million views in a day. A lot of people are tremendously interested in that car, and there's a lot more great stuff to come, both on my main channel and here on More Doug. But today I want to talk a little bit about that Koenigsegg video, and I'm going to show you some of the scenes that I removed from it. Next week I'm going to answer a question I've been getting very often about the video, which is, what is the prep that goes into making a video with a car that's worth millions of dollars? Both, insurance and strategically, and what kind of stuff do you have to do, plus also mentally. But I'll cover that next week. Today I want to talk about what I cut out of my Koenigsegg review. Now you might be wondering, why are you cutting anything out for car reviews? This isn't a major Hollywood motion picture and you're trying to format it for the big screen. It's a car review on YouTube. But the thing is, that was a 38-minute video. And you don't want to go too long. A car has a lot of great stuff, but if that was a 2-hour video, people would be like, well, that's cool, but that's too much. So when I watch the video and when I'm editing it, I'm always got a really sharp eye trying to make sure, okay, maybe that's a little too boring, maybe that's not necessary. And even on a car like the Koenigsegg, where people are interested in basically all of the details, there are still some details that I think just go too far and kind of deserve to be cut. But today I'm going to show you exactly what those details were, and I'm going to explain why I chose to cut out what I did. So with that in mind, let's get started. Now, another interesting item you noticed right when you climb inside is the speakers. You can see they're not actually mounted on the door. Instead, they're mounted on this panel that comes out really surprisingly far. In most cars, that would be a door panel, but in this car, it's part of the whole dashboard situation. Okay, so why did I cut this out? This was actually the last thing that I cut out from the video, the very last thing before I published it. And ultimately, I kind of watched it and I just thought to myself, so the dashboard comes a little further than in a regular car. It's a little bit difficult to show exactly what I mean. And what I mean is the dashboard sort of makes this curve and comes at you and it's almost next to you. But it's hard to show that, and I didn't really describe it all that well. I didn't feel that that was a really necessary detail to devote 15 seconds to in a video that's already over 38 minutes long. It was just a little too much and a little bit too uninteresting, so it got cut. Now, most Koenigsegg's have bolts on this panel, but this particular one, they were able to get it covered in this beautiful Alcantara to match the rest of the dashboard in this gorgeous blue color, and that's kind of an odd placement. Now, one thing they weren't able to get to match the rest of the car in the blue color is the side airbag that's built into the doors, and that had to be black. Everything else, though, is this gorgeous blue, and it matches perfectly the seats, the rest of the interior, and it is just a fantastic experience simply looking at it inside this interior. Okay, so why did I cut this? This one is a little bit more complicated, and there's a couple of different sections of it. The first section is other Koenigsegg's have bolts here, but this one has just the Alcantara and it looks better. Well, I cut that because who cares what other Koenigseggs have? I mean, we're talking about a highly customizable car that's limited to 25 units. So there's no standard Koenigsegg, each person sort of individually decides what they want. And so I didn't feel like it was necessary to talk about how this Koenigsegg has this special thing and other ones don't, because they're all sort of distinctive and unique in their own way. And I didn't feel that was necessary to mention. Now, the next line, talking about the airbag being black and how they couldn't change that, that is actually pretty cool. That's kind of interesting. Even ultimate customized Koenigsegg, there are some limitations. But I couldn't keep that in if I wanted to take out the line before it about the bolts. And then the line after it I thought was a little bit too boring. Just, oh, it's a blue interior and everything's blue and it's really blue and it looks cool, which it does, but I didn't need to restate it. And the problem is all those lines flowed together, so I couldn't just do the airbag cover, and so they all had to go. This is something I'm constantly cognizant of when I'm filming is don't ever say anything that leads into something else, because if you have to take out the thing you said first, then the something else doesn't make sense. And so I try not to film in that way, but I did here, and it was a mistake because I lost that cool line about the airbag cover just because I wanted to remove the stuff on the other sides of it. And so for your final door related question, you might be wondering, okay, fine, how do you close the doors from the outside? That actually is fairly simple too. You just kind of push on the door for a little while, and then once it gets about halfway, you just let it do its thing, it closes, and there you go. Okay, this one, I shouldn't have taken this out. When I did the BMW i8 Roadster, I spent probably too long on the doors, like 2 minutes. And people complained bitterly, I've seen butterfly doors before, you're just trying to milk this for extra time. And so I'm always sensitive to spending too long on any one thing, especially something like doors where I've shown it opening from the outside, opening from the inside, closing from the inside. I didn't need to also show it closing from the outside, but as it turned out, I didn't get those complaints with this video. I probably should have left it in, especially because it's actually kind of interesting that you don't shut the door all the way, you just sort of shut it part of the way, and the door does the rest. That's interesting. Should have stayed in, also because it was only 14 seconds, not that much time. I regret taking that out. But the really cool thing is these little lights that light up telling you what each button does. In a traditional plastic button, you just make that part clear and turn on a light, no big deal. In this, they had to poke these tiny little nano holes inside the aluminum and then have a light behind it to project out and show what every button does. Now, the interesting thing is, if you press the buttons enough, the oil and grease on your fingers will start to sort of cover up those nano holes. So you have to make sure to keep these things clean if you want to actually see what your buttons do. Okay, this one. The first part of that did stay in. The part how the buttons are aluminum and they had to poke the little holes, that stayed in. The second part about the oil from your fingers getting in the buttons, that would be great info if this was a consumer review like the RAV4 or the Highlander. But it's a Koenigsegg, and you're not buying one, and I'm not buying one, and so you don't really care if the oil from your fingers clogs up the buttons. And I couldn't really demonstrate it also because the owner of this car kept it very clean, and so that wasn't happening in this car. And so I just figured, 15 seconds is too much to devote to talking about how finger oils covers up some buttons in a Koenigsegg. That's even too detailed for me. And also, one other thing to keep in mind, 40 minutes was constantly in my mind as I was editing this video. I didn't want to go over 40 minutes. That just seems too long. And so anything I cut was kind of cutting it down from the 40-minute mark. And so this was a casualty of that, and it definitely was worth cutting. You can actually see how much coolant is in your car in that little window. I've never seen anything else like that. That is pretty crazy. It's also worth noting there is also a little Koenigsegg crest on this carbon fiber piece that you can barely see from the side of the car. They know no one will ever look at this or see it, but they still managed to put the crest there, which is just really impressive attention to detail. That is really impressive attention to detail, but I took that out. The first part of that stayed in, the little window that you can see the coolant level on the side of the car. That was one of my favorite quirks of the entire car. But the second part I took out because I had already covered the Koenigsegg crest so many times, and it had been integrated into so many cooler places, like the parking brake handle and the door handle and the mirror turn signal. And I just felt like simply stamping a crest onto a piece under the hood wasn't interesting enough after I've already covered the crest so many times that it really deserved a mention. So that first half stayed in, but the second part talking about how there's just another crest on the car, it wasn't really special enough. In this car, strangely, it doesn't show the degrees. It just says sort of min, which I guess is cool, and then max, which is heat, which is kind of unusual. Also down there, you can adjust the fan speed. Like I mentioned before, you can also do that with that little knob above the circle of buttons in the center control stack. So the fan speed has a redundant control. Okay, that one was the first thing I cut. And that bored me when I was editing the video, which usually doesn't happen. I usually get a real thrill kind of stitching it all together like a puzzle. But the redundant fan controls on a Koenigsegg, I mean, you can turn it or you can press the screen. That's just too detailed. Again, there are some things, even on a car like this, where I know people want to see the details. There are some things that are just too detailed to leave in a video, especially when I really think there's a mental block for viewers when they see the video is 41 minutes long versus 38 minutes long. 41 is like, well, that's a whole day. 38 is like, oh yeah, I'll just take a little longer lunch break. And so cutting stuff like that, I feel like is important when it's just a little bit too minute and pedantic. for anybody to really care about. So those are the scenes that I cut out of the Koenigsegg video. Everything else stayed in. I kept most things, almost everything, because there's just so much cool stuff and so much interesting stuff in this car. And most people don't get an opportunity to get up close with it like this, and I probably never will again. So that's what I removed from the Koenigsegg video. Next week, like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the prep that goes into driving a car like this. You know, the real insurance prep and the research and the stuff you have to find out beforehand, but also, you know, mentally, what's that like? I'll talk about that next week. And as always, if you have questions for me, you can send them to me at moredougdemuro@gmail.com. And occasionally I will post videos here on the More Doug channel and I will answer your questions. But with that, enjoy the rest of Dougcember. There are some very exciting videos still to come, both on the More Doug channel and especially on the main channel.